Welcome to the CG Pro podcast. This is episode 93. And oh boy, we have an episode for you today. We have Mr. Scott Ross and Daniel Lay. Scott Ross was the founder of Digital Domain, former general manager of ILM, and author of the book Upstart, an amazing book about history of visual effects. And Mr. Daniel Lay, who was famously VFX Soldier and was a huge part, both of them were a huge part of trying to help revolutionize the visual effects industry, bring it back from some of the challenges it's gone through, it's still going through. And we're here today to talk more about that and where it is today. If you enjoy the show, sign up for our newsletter and you'll hear more about these shows coming up. We have courses as well, and you'll also hear more about those things. So without further ado, I introduce Mr. Scott Ross and Mr. Daniel Lay.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey,
It's going great. Thank you both for being here.
Appreciate it. And happy belated birthday to Scott Ross, who celebrated his birthday yesterday.
I'm thinking of becoming dyslexic and saying I'm 47. What do you think?
Then I'm 50. I'm 54. Then
there you go.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Well, happy birthday indeed, and thanks
you,
for taking time, both of you, out of your lives to be here and
appreciate
talk about the subject that's been a huge part of all of our lives, and about visual effects and where it's been and where it's going. Scott, we had on the podcast recently, and we went through a lot of your history and your life and the things that inspired you. And we talked about everything up to jazz music and the saxophone. And it was a wonderful episode. Just for anyone who hasn't seen that episode, can you tell us a little bit about what you've done in the world of VFX?
I was born a poor young white boy in the Bronx in 1951. I got involved in media and entertainment. I had this incredible desire to be a jazz musician. I wound up being a sound engineer and toured with the Miles Davis Band back in the 1970s with Bitches Brew. And so as a result, I thought, this is the coolest music ever. And I decided I'd be a saxophone player until one day I was on the bandstand and trying to play a tune that was in the key of A flat. And this 15-year-old kid gets up and calls that same tune Donna Lee in D flat. And I looked at myself and I said, I just don't have the chops. I'm not good enough to be, a musician that makes a difference. And I thought I'd wind up like playing Hava Nagila and bar mitzvah bands, at the age of 45 in a shiny black suit. So I gave it up. But my sound engineering background sort of came into effect, and I wound up doing audio for television and film, and then was hired at a company called One Pass Video in San Francisco, which is sort of the seminal post-production company, and became its president, and then was headhunted by Lucasfilm and ultimately ran Industrial Light and Magic, and then senior vice president of all of Lucasfilm. And then Doug Norby, the president of the company, and I had religious differences, and he thought he was God and I didn't agree. And so I wound up leaving and had to do something. Here I was with a wife and 3 kids and no salary and no savings. And so I decided to, foolish me, start a visual effects company called Digital Domain.
Well, thank you for starting that company, because I worked in it and had tons
thank
of
you
fun
also.
You're quite welcome.
And keeping ILM going, as I had the chance to do that too.
Yeah.
So amazing history, and you've seen a lot of change, and I'm looking forward to digging into that more. And before we do, Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about what you've done in the VFX world?
Not as nowhere near the accomplishments that Scott has made, but
Daniel.
But I feel definitely punching my lower weight as much as possible here. I started in the visual effects industry, I think around 2004 at Sony Pictures ImageWorks. Prior to that, as a kid growing up, I was an artist, and then I ended up going to college studying computer graphics as well as computer science at UC San Diego. And to my surprise, I didn't even think the film industry would be interested in me, but Sony Pictures Imageworks came and started working there for a bit. Started off working in production services, so definitely did the grunt work, right? And then I was just always looking for an opportunity. Loved creature effects. I loved character rigging and all that. And there were a lot of films at Sony Pictures Imageworks were like, hey, would you be interested in character effects? Because we really need a lot of characters here that need their hair, cloth, all that being done there. So I got into that, and that was a really nice niche of work to find, because soon enough, DreamWorks Animation called, and where I had a chance to work on Monsters vs. Aliens, as well as Shrek Forever After. And then finally made it to Digital Domain, where I worked on Tron Legacy, worked on G.I. Joe, and a number of films there. All in all, I started, I think, around 2004, and then kind of transitioned out of the industry around 2013. But in the middle of that time, when I was at Digital Domain, I started writing an anonymous blog called VFX Soldier, which I'm probably more famously known about, right? So that's kind of most of the background of kind of my experience there in the visual effects industry.
Amazing. Yeah, and probably more well known for that than the
Yeah.
hairdos of creatures that you did over the years.
But he did
Yeah.
do really good hairdos. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to take his hairdos away from him, you know.
Yeah.
No, let's not diminish those for sure. So yeah, that, and to take us back a little bit to
Yeah.
that time, I arrived in America with a bag in 2012, and it was just after that I ended up in a green T-shirt on the
Yeah.
streets with you guys outside the Oscars.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
trying to make
Yeah.
some noise.
Yeah.
You know, and it was an important time, felt very important.
Yeah.
What take us up to that moment? What were some of the things that sure you both were doing to try and vocalize some of the challenges? What were some of the challenges anyway at that time?
Well, I think what happened, I think when I was at Sony Pictures Imageworks, it was starting to become pretty interesting there to learn about how high the turnover was within the industry. And then there were issues of, for us as workers, right, about like, well, benefits. And then also you had sort of this emergence, right, of the global VFX industry, as well as the issue of, which we later find out, or through my research, I kind of brought up, was the issue of subsidies, right, of where the work was going. But I think where that catalyst started was, I think there was an individual by at the time, I think Avatar came out, and Lee Stranahan, who was a former VFX artist, came out with a Huffington Post article saying, hey, people talk about how great these VFX movies are and how much money they make, but the VFX artists are actually in a very difficult situation, right? And so,
And abused.
yeah, and abused, right? And that caused kind of a ripple effect where I think, Scott, you were on Effects Guide, you were doing a lot of podcasts talking about the issues in the industry, and that was causing a lot of chatter in the industry. And then myself, I was just, I wasn't a VFX, supervisor or CG supervisor. I was just a guy in the trenches and trying to understand this, trying to maybe, because I was concerned about a lot of the issues that we were facing. There was, overtime issues, people working really long hours. You had people who weren't getting health insurance. You had people being laid off, right, and then having to pack their bags, move somewhere else. I mean, you came here, right, from internationally. Ed, where were you from originally, or where are you coming from?
London, South London,
London,
originally.
South London. Yeah. So, you came to the United States, right? So there was kind of like everybody's living out of a suitcase, and that was kind of what was emerging. And
Digital gypsies.
yeah, digital gypsies, right? So, or more appropriately, what I called the endless cycle of displacement. That was something that we were all facing, right? And I wanted to kind of have that conversation. That was kind of when social media was kind of taking off. And so I started a blog and just anonymously started talking about the business issues, about the labor practices. And thankfully, Scott was really engaging. At first, I think we'll talk more about this, how we started off as adversaries and it later joined forces, right, to see if we can maybe do something to help the VFX industry, right? So that's kind of
if you go, I'm sort of the OG guy in the room here. So
yeah.
We could take it back to the late 1980s, right? And in the late 1980s, when I was the general manager and running Industrial Light and Magic, I couldn't believe the business model. It was hard. I walked into ILM thinking that, this is the penultimate visual effects facility in the world. It wins all the Academy Awards. It's the most famous. It has most of the market share. And the stuff that the men and women were doing at ILM really put seats in the and put seats in seats, so put their butts in seats, and drove box office. And so I couldn't quite get my head around why it was that we and everyone else in the industry were not making any money. So I had come from a video post-production company called One Pass in the 1970s and 80s, and we had a commercial production company, and our commercial production company was part of a group called the AICP, which is the Association of Independent Commercial Producers. And it was a powerful organization and did great things for commercial production people. And so I decided that we should have a similar kind of organization in visual effects. So I started a group called, and I sort of played off my 7th grade French, AVEC, which means with in French, and it stood for the Association of Visual Effects Creators. And I decided I would get all of the senior people from the major visual effects facilities around the United States at that time, mostly in LA and the Bay Area, together to discuss a possibility of changing the business model. But everybody was so paranoid and distrustful that they assumed that I was trying to rip them off or I was trying to steal their employees. And so it never really got off. And then years later, after I left Digital Domain, I decided what the industry needed was a trade association. So once again, I went to a world-class legal firm because everybody was concerned about the issues that were going down with Ed Catmull and Pixar and setting rates. And you might remember that court case. And none of the big visual effects companies wanted to, be seen as having a monopoly or price fixing. And it wasn't about that. It was changing the business model. So I was able to get 15 of the top visual effects companies in the world in that meeting. And I thought the meeting was really, really good. And I walked away thinking, in the Etta James version, at last, the time has come. And it turns out every single one of them got cold feet and every single one of them walked away. So once again, an effort 20 years after the first time I tried it, it fell apart again. And the intention was to change the business model so that visual effects companies could actually make money. And if my take was, if visual effects companies make money, then they're quite aware of who are the people that are making money for them, which is the visual effects workers. And so the whole paradigm would shift. And I always thought that you needed to start from that base, because if you don't have any money, you can't do anything, right? And so I was hopeful that that would happen, but it didn't. And then the Academy Awards were going to take place, and I literally had a dream. I beg your pardon, Martin Luther King, but I literally had a dream that we were picketing outside of the Academy Awards. Through this time, I also had become closer with Daniel and Visual Effects Soldier and a couple of other people, Jeff Huser, may he rest in peace, and Dave Rand, and Mariana, what was her name?
Mariana.
Right. And so a group of us sort of shared a sensibility that we could change this. And so Pi Day happened, and, the demonstrations happened, and, we saw Rhythm and Hughes go out of business, and we saw Bill Westerhoff getting pulled off the air to Jaws. And at that point, there was so much anger and as well as hope that we could actually change something. So we had a headwind. And, through Daniel's Visual Effects Soldier blog, we were able to rally troops, and we thought, okay, this is the time. It's finally going to happen after my effort in the late 80s. Here we were 20 some odd years later. And it turns out that that visual effects workers like to whine, but they don't like to do anything. So when Daniel wound up pulling in a law firm to be able to do countervailing tariffs, to be able to help stop the madness, we needed to raise funds to be able to pay for this law firm. And no one came to the table with any money. So all of these visual effects workers around the world were really upset, but they weren't willing to actually put money where their wine was, as it was. And so ultimately it fell apart. Once again, take 3 strikeout, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Daniel, tell us about the anonymity of your blog, because it was I was very aware of VFX Soldier, but no idea it was you.
Yeah.
And it being anonymous is an interesting factor, I think.
Yeah, and I think it was intentional. I wasn't really afraid about what I was saying, but I think the intention for me was that, look, I'm just a person in the trenches, right? And I wanted to, and sometimes people would say I was kind of like Batman, right? Where you kind of wanted to
Yeah,
become more of a symbol, right? And
there
I
was
think it's,
mystery and more
yeah, there was a
fear. Yeah,
mystery, right? And
Yeah.
people were trying to find out who I was, right? And people were, sometimes on the blog you'd see comments threatening that, and all those threats and all that fear just ended up making people more emboldened to say, hey, look, I'm VFX Soldier too, right? And I think
Right.
that's how the symbol sort of took off. And it wasn't something that I had planned or anything like that. I just said, hey, look, I didn't want to put my ego in this. I wanted to say this is all about us, and we're all trying to make things better for each other. And that's what driven a lot of that anonymity. But alternatively, what I didn't realize was because at some point, when things got, I think, towards the climax there were people who were unfairly and wrongly being accused of being VFX Soldier, right? And when I realized that, okay, this is now threatening people who had nothing to do with my blog, that's when I realized, and it just made a lot of sense then for me to just come forward and say, hey, look, I'm VFX Soldier and I want to help, because it was just, it didn't make sense to have Scott, Dave Rand out there trying to push, these arguments that I was making on my blog. And I said, you know what, I got to take this and I got to help drive this, And so, as appreciative as I am to everyone who helped us, and I know Scott named some names there, but there are also some other names that we can't reveal who are really big. Huge shout out, huge thank you to all of them, who helped us with this. But it just takes an effort for everybody, and then it just makes it easier across the board. So that's kind of why I came forward there.
what was it like going from being anonymous to not being anonymous?
It was shockingly great, because so many people came through that I thought wouldn't like VFX Soldier came through and thanked me. I mean, there were, VFX executives who I thought would probably want to fire me came through and said, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. You're saying something that I could not say, and that's really sad, because we didn't have that dialogue. And really what it was about, whether it be a labor organization, whether it be a trade organization, whether it be a legal effort on subsidies, the goal at the end of the day, the strategy was to get that final conversation with the studios, which the VFX industry still does not have today, right? And that's what we really need, is we need the studios at the table, we need the VFX facilities at the table, and yes, even the artists, they need to be at the table there to discuss, like, hey, look, we can make this right. And I still think today there's a path, right? And there should be a path. And that would, I think, fix a lot of the problems the industry has been facing.
We have a question from the chat already,
Yeah.
which is, why not unionize? Instead of a trade body, why not unionize if the intent was to help the creatives, i.e. the artists? Scott, with his hand up.
Can I take this?
This is where
Yes, you may.
Can I take this one? It's
Yeah.
interestingly, I have been called by various people, generally on Reddit, which is, I still have a hard time sort of understanding what that is. It's like, if Reddit was around during, the 1930s in Germany, there'd be a lot more people dead, because they would have outed everybody and be anonymous,
Yeah.
But, I've been accused of being a union buster, which is hysterical, right? So I'm probably the only visual effects executive that ran both a union and a non-union shop. And when I ran the union shop, by the way, we were still union when I left at ILM, I sat on the board of trustees of IATSE Local 16. So my father was a union guy. I marched with Cesar Chavez. That's how old I am, right? So I'm a union guy. I'm a democratic socialist. I'm a lefty. And so it pisses me off when people say that, Scott Ross is a union buster. The reality is, if you look at it, the industry is an international industry. And given the fact that it's an international industry, and it's no longer like, well, if you want A+ work, you have to go to Digital Domain or Sony or ILM, you can get A+ work all over the globe. And so given the fact that the community of visual effects artists are now international, the concept of a union is that union better be able to have signatories of all over the globe. because if they come to a union shop, and let's say that union shop is in the United States, having run a union shop in the United States, the costs are higher, somewhat significantly higher, because you now have to pay pension and welfare and blah, blah, all of the things that companies should be paying if there was profit, but they can't really afford it. So what happens is that the price that the union shop in, let's say, Los Angeles has is going to be about 25% higher than the shop that is in London that doesn't have a union, or in Pune that doesn't have a union. And so what it's going to do is, unless there's an international, truly an international union, you're going to wind up harming the people that are signatories, because the clients, the producers, and the motion picture studios care about two things: price and quality. And if they can get good quality, as well as getting good quality with a union shop in a non-union environment, they'll go there. So I think, it's like, first you get the money, then you get the power, so the first thing that has to happen is the business model has to change. And once the business model changes and there's actual money being made by the people that should be making the money, including the artists, right? By the way, they should get residuals as well. Then there can be a union. But if you put the cart before the horse, personally, I think it's going to be really damaging.
Right. Yeah.
Can
The path of least resistance is physics is
Now,
involved here. Things go to that. Yeah, Daniel.
I'd love to push back on that, right? So I'm definitely the pro-union guy, and Scott is obviously pro-union, but he understands that there are logistics, right? And I would agree with that. There are logistics when it comes to the global VFX industry, but it doesn't need to be monolithic, right? Yes, you have unions here in the United States, and for decades in the film industry, you've had unions that exist in the UK, unions that exist in Australia, right? So there's nothing that needs to be a whole monolithic, everybody all at once. Now, when it comes to the costs, yes, there are going to be costs associated, because if you're going to ask for better treatment or pay for overtime, those are going to be costs that go up. And obviously, there are going to be other places that don't offer that. But look, we've had unions involved in the animation industry for years, and there are a lot of VFX artists that work there. It's not like there's been a dearth of work that's left, right? Because of that, and not because specifically to the unions, right? Maybe because of subsidies or other factors that we have out there. Now, I will say this though: at the end of the day, whether it's a trade organization or a union or or a legal effort, right? The goal should always have been to bring the studios to the table, because then you could negotiate a better business model. And I think that's always what was the goal and what I looked at. There were flaws in every solution out there, but ultimately bringing them to the table, I think that's what was needed here. And the unions, the bigger unions out there, they already have that at the table, right? They negotiate almost every 4 years, right, with the studios directly. The IA, I think some of the unions out there in the UK, they negotiate directly with the studios. And so that's why I think when the question is asked, why not use a union? Like, that is a mechanism to be there, but ultimately we want to make sure that we're using every lever out there. And I think that's why Scott and I did join forces, right, to kind of find out what else could we do, right, to kind of help with the VFX industry there.
Yeah, there's a great story. I've had my years of issues with the VES, and I attended the VES production summit, maybe, I'm going to say 12, 15 years ago. And the producer of Gravity was also the head of Warner Brothers post-production. You all know who he is, right? And he was on stage, and, Gravity had just come out, and the numbers were astronomical. Sandra Bullock was making like $70 million or something. Meanwhile, the movie was not about Sandra Bullock or George Clooney. The movie was about the work that Framestore did and putting people in outer space. So, and all of that work. And Framestore, I haven't had a look at their P&L reports at the time, but I'm sure they made no money. So the balance of fairness was totally off. You had a motion picture sort of star. I mean, Sandra Bullock is sort of a star, and George Clooney, who is a star. They're making a ton of money, while the people that are really making the movie popular and worthwhile to go see are barely eking out a profit. And so I asked this executive why that was the case, and he said, that's because you don't have any representation. He said, when the studio wanted Sandra Bullock, we had to deal with her agent. So who are your agents? Who's out there representing the visual effects industry? And the answer was no one. And so that's a problem. To Daniel's point, you can't make a change unless you're sitting at the table talking to the people with the levers of power, and visual effects has never had that.
Yeah, no, it hasn't. One of the only groups in filmmaking that doesn't, if not the only one, where we're down the bottom end of the credits under the people that sweep the floors. It's interesting, yeah. And film stars seem to get that big payday because they're somewhat of a marketing vehicle for the movie, drawing people in.
And I push back on that. I push back on it big time. So if we take a look at box office today on the major blockbuster movies, domestic box office is considerably less than it used to be, and international box office is through the roof because of China and Japan and Europe and whatnot. And so, what really puts butts in the seat is not the fact that Steven Seagal is the star of the movie, or Arnold Schwarzenegger, or Tom Cruise. What puts butts in the seat is the trailer, and the language. The international language is a visual language. So visually, it's all about visual effects. So if you're going to see a trailer where, worlds explode and things you've never seen before in China, people are going to go see that. But Tom Hanks, and I love Tom Hanks, he's a wonderful human being, but he's not getting the Chinese population of 1 point some odd billion people excited. The real is. And so visual effects has the power to be I think, the most powerful marketing tool for motion pictures around the world.
We have another question here from the audience. Given the failed attempts to change the status quo, if we are to pin down what can be done to change the business model, what can we actually do that hasn't been tried already?
That's the billion-dollar question, right? It's like, and by the way, as Daniel and I have sort of moved on to an extent, I mean, I'm still trying to fight the good fight, and I speak all over the world about it. But if we look at the landscape now of visual effects facilities, first of all, when I started, there were 7 visual effects facilities in the entire world. Now there are over 1,500. But the big players, many of them are owned by studios. So ILM's owned by Disney, right? And you can go down the line. There are a few of the big players that are not. But to be able to change the business model, you have to have the leverage to be able to go to the studios and say, oh, so you want to make a movie like Avatar with 2,500 shots in it? Well, you're going to have to deal with us because there's nowhere else to go, right? And so given the landscape today, I'm at a loss. I'm not sure what could be done. Maybe Daniel has some thoughts on that.
I think across all the levers we were looking at and all the options, right? So we talked about trade organization. We talked about the labor organization. We talked about, a lawsuit, based off the subsidies. All these were trying to use some sort of stick, right? Or some carrot to bring them to the table. The last lever that was there that I think none of us had the power to pull was a global stoppage of work, right? If there was a global stoppage of work, I'm not suggesting that should happen. I don't have the ability to do that. I don't think it's possible. But I think if that happened, then yes, you would have the studios immediately come to the table because they're like, wait, there's a stoppage of work, but also you run the risk of people not being paid and also people with different opinions, right? I mean, why should somebody in Australia go on strike for a VFX artist that's out here in the United States that's trying to get healthcare, for example, right? They're like, hey, we get healthcare through our government. So there's a lot of thrash that can happen because of that. And that's why I looked at that as an option of like, that's a last resort. And that is something that I don't even think anybody has the leverage to do that right now, especially now, I think. So that's, I think, the only option out there. Or maybe if there was some campaign socially that brought a big awareness about the plight of VFX workers that caused maybe people who go to the movies to stop, right? You saw what happened with Disney Plus, right? I think a lot of people were banding after what was going on with Jimmy Kimmel, right? After the president was going after them. A lot of people abandoned their Disney Plus accounts, and that caused Disney to immediately say, hold on here, we're not going to take Jimmy Kimmel off the air, right? So you're going to need something like that to kind of get people's attention, but that would take a lot of effort, I think, for VFX artists to do that.
Here's another thought, Daniel. Now that you brought it up, I'm thinking about it. If there was a way for software and hardware providers,
Mm-hmm.
who visual effects companies are their sort of income stream,
Mm-hmm.
if they came out as well and said, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore, this is not fair,
Mm-hmm.
that might also have some weight.
That
I can't
might.
imagine that they would do that, but
Mm-hmm. But who are those? Right? Who are those companies? Are they Amazon and Google? Because now they're in the film industry now, right? So
That's
now
right.
they're the studios now, right? So now the people who we think can help us are actually joining the studios also. So that's a challenge there, right? So, but it's an interesting idea, and but I'm open to ideas, and if anybody else has those, become the next VFX soldier and take it on, because the ball's there, it's rolling slowly, but it's
still a ball.
Yeah, there's still a ball, right? There's still a ball. But I think the thing is, I think everybody understands is a system that can't persist. It can't exist the way it is right now. And something's got to change. And whether it's going to change naturally or something disruptive happens, I'm looking forward to seeing what'll happen. But, we don't know. That's the thing.
And so you mentioned that you're moved out kind of the VFX industry around 2013, but the blog is still going, right?
Yeah,
you're still
the blog. I thought about deleting the blog, but then so many people told me, like, no, keep that up. And it's funny because now with AI and ChatGPT, I wonder if the blog has fed a lot of large language models information, because now when you ask about solutions around the VFX industry, it cites my blog, which is really interesting, which may have led to the President of the United States, which not sure, but there's a funny story around that maybe I can tell if we have some time.
we have
but
time.
Yeah. Oh, do you want to hear that now, or I guess?
Please.
Yeah. So I did recently put up a blog post, and as soon as Donald Trump got elected, which I'm not a supporter, and I know Scott is definitely not a supporter of, right? I disagree with 99.99% of Donald Trump's policies. But one thing that up to his election that he was saying that he was going to do, that he did do, was implementing tariffs. And that was something I was a big advocate for. And our group, when we joined, when me and Scott joined forces, we wanted to try to put a tariff against the movie studios to try to take away their subsidies, right? Because a lot of films depend on international as well as domestic subsidies for funding. So we felt if we take or threaten to take that away, that would bring them to the table. And there was a Sony hack, if you know, that emails that got out from production executives, and they do even mention our effort. They were very concerned, and they admitted that the VFX guys got us on this, as one of the quotes from the executives between the MPAA. So what we were trying to do was to implement those tariffs. And as soon as Donald Trump got elected, there was some chatter going up across VFX artists, like, do you think he'll do this for the movie industry? And at the time, President Trump came out and said he's got this task force, right, with Sylvester Stallone, John Voight, and Mel Gibson to save the film industry. And immediately I thought it was laughable. I'm like, they're not going to do anything. But I get a message from a friend who said he was out in Hollywood and he met with John Voight. I was shocked. I said, wow, you met John Voight? And he said, yeah. And you know what I did? I had a conversation with him about the VFX industry, and he had no idea what was going on, and he was very interested. And he told him about my blog. And I thought, okay, yeah, maybe he mentioned his blog, but he goes, Daniel, you got to understand something. He actually went back to his car to grab a notebook and come back, wrote down my blog's name and underlined it. And I thought, thank God I never deleted that blog, right? Because he probably did read it. And he probably did use ChatGPT or something, because later on he goes to Mar-a-Lago and they give him a write-up, which I think Deadline later shared, that actually showed some of the wording that they were using almost came from my blog. There were multiple people that told me, this sounds like something comes from your blog. So I wonder if they were using a large language model that was referencing my blog. But that ultimately led to President Trump announcing, I think back in May, that he wanted to implement a tariff on the right now the international film industry. But we'll see where it goes. And I've been privy to a group that's been interested in doing that. So there's something going on for sure. And it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And I know it's very controversial. It's very concerning. I see on Reddit, a lot of the international VFX artists are really concerned. I hope my address isn't out there, because I wonder if somebody's going to try to put a hit on me, because there's a lot of anger around that. So it's a controversial move, and it's not something I was necessarily for. I think strategically, I can now reveal that me and Scott, our idea was not to implement a tariff, but try to bring the studios to the table and then say, sure, go ahead and keep your subsidies if you'd like, but maybe put a cap on them, and then get some bargaining going on there. But that was the whole idea, and that's kind of what happened out of that.
Yeah, fascinating. And encouraging hopefully while people think that they can't have a voice, you as you said, were an artist on the line.
Yeah.
A regular visual effects artist who decided to stand up and say something, and you got your voice got out there. So
it's really remarkable, and I really want to remark on that for a moment here, because those Sony hack emails, I might be the only VFX artist that was ever mentioned by the Motion Picture Association of America, just with my writing. That really is remarkable. Imagine if every VFX artist stood up and just had a voice like that.
We're mad as hell, and we're not going to take it anymore.
Things would be a lot different, right? And I really do want to encourage that next generation of VFX artists. Like, hey, we gotta do something, because keeping quiet is not working. Nobody writes a history book. Open up any random page in history. Nobody writes a page about somebody who did nothing, right? You got to do something, right? So I think that's really important there.
Yes, we've got to take risks in life, right? Otherwise, you don't get anywhere. Yeah. I think a lot of people felt that risk and stayed quiet for that reason, hearing of blacklisting and various reasons that might cause them to not be hired back at places. I know that's been a note, particularly when I was in London, but here too. We have a whole load of questions coming in. Wow.
Nice.
So somebody says, what about change orders? I went to war with the VES over that issue in the early 2000s. How can VFX be called a business when you can change the blueprints for the house at any point with no financial consequences?
That's a good point. I mean, I've talked about that analogy for years and years. The old building a house contractor, and then all of a sudden they say, we would like to add another bedroom, and we want marble in the bathroom, and what about that gold toilet? And getting back to that trade association thing, the MPAA is a trade association.
Yes.
And at least when I was in the business, I know that the heads of production and heads of post-production would get together regularly. I think it was maybe once a month, and they would have lunch of every major studio, which at the time was about 6 or 7. And they'd get together and they'd have lunch. And one of the things that would always come up was the issue of visual effects, because as the movies became more visual effects intensive, it became the largest line item budget in the making of a film. And so they were very, very, very concerned about anything happening around that. So, I understand why they're upset and why they want to do something about it, but they also would talk about change orders. So if you had only 6 or 7 clients, when I was running ILM, we had 5 or 6 clients, and that client would say, now paint it black as opposed to paint it red, and we'd come back with a change order, the client would always say, you got to help me out on this one this time. I've even had that conversation with Kathleen, Kennedy and Steven Spielberg, where it's like, hey guys, could you really help me out on Always? It's, we really need some. This is Steven frickin' Spielberg, and they're asking us who are already losing money to help him make more money. So the change order concept became something that was almost like a cry for war. When you brought a change order forward, the studios and the producers would come back and beat you up, and then they'd go to their post-production get together once a month and say, can you believe that Industrial Light and Magic or Digital Domain is asking for these change orders? This is just bullshit. And that's one of the reasons why ILM became, when I was running it, I was tough on it, where ILM was known for it loves money.
I think the issue with the change orders is it has to start with the artist first, right? Look, we wear this as a badge of honor. As much as we hate those change orders, when we're leaving at, working a 12-hour day, multiple iterations, right? We wear that as a badge of honor, right? And so this is an industry of passion, and the business people on the studio side, they know that. And if they know that they can take advantage of you and say, hey, look, we can squeeze out more iterations out of a VFX facility. And that's part of the reason that Scott, I was hoping for that trade organization to go through, because that's where it could be negotiated. Hey, look, there's a cost plus model here. If you have multiple iterations, this is how the construction industry works. I have a contractor that comes into my house. We worked on a bid, and then I wanted to change something. Sorry, you're going to have to change your order, and you're going to have to charge. We're going to have to charge more for that. That's how the rest of the world works, and unfortunately,
That's how production works.
Yeah, that's and so. That's where a cost plus model could have been implemented, right? And that's a simple change that would have alleviated a lot of problems and actually keep a lot of VFX facilities that went out of business to stay in business, right? So,
and by the way, the technology is there to allow for total transparency. So if you were John Landau working at Lightstorm, and or the person who was head of post production or visual effects, John Kilkenny at 20th Century Fox, they could get daily reports. Total transparency about what's happening, what it's costing, and then they could make the choices. And in fact, it might actually wind up saving them money.
Yeah. And, maybe AI will help with that, right? I think AI will help, would love to, I call it, change orders, but let's call it for what it is in the industry, pixel effing, right? That's what we called it, right? So maybe there might be AI agents, right, who can help better direct film, notes on a shot, so that way there are less iterations done, right? So that way we don't have so many change orders. But I think that'll be interesting to see if where the industry goes with that.
Well, since you called out the other big buzzword on the title,
here we go,
the podcast. Let's let that cat out of the bag. So what AI, you mentioned AI in a kind of a positive light there, talking about it helping things. There's lots of concern, excitement, fear, etc. around AI. Me and Scott talked about this quite a bit on the last podcast as well, but I'd love to explore this idea a little bit with AI coming in, and through the strikes that happened only a few years ago, and the amount of change that has happened in production since then, and AI kind of appearing in that space. It's a very wild space right now, and everybody's kind of pointing towards one thing or another to being the fault of why we're in a situation where production is lower, but then AI is emerging into that space. What do you think that AI has to offer us?
Is that for Scott there, or
either of you?
Scott, you want to go first on that?
What things could AI do? Because you brought it up in that light, so I think it's really interesting.
So AI is a paradox. On one hand, it's an amazing tool that can do amazing things, and on the other hand, it's frightening and can screw up a lot of lives and possibly cause wars and terrible stuff. I've talked about this before, where years ago when I started Digital Domain, I was looking for a title for what I would call people, particularly in terms of compensation. So I came up with the title Digital Artist. And there was a Digital Artist 3, Digital Artist 2, Digital Artist 1, all depending upon their seniority and ultimately, therefore, their compensation. The concept of digital artist is sort of an anathema to me, because and I talk about this a lot in the past, there's sort of tertiary artists, secondary artists, and primary artists. So a primary artist is somebody who goes out into the field, chops out a piece of marble, and decides to make the Venus de Milo, right? A secondary artist says to the primary artist, well, what kind of marble do you want? And maybe it would look better if there were actually arms on the Venus de Milo, and maybe even a head. And then the tertiary artist says, okay, well, what do you want the head to look like? Or, oh, you want the head to look like that? Then I'll do it this way. So a large portion of the visual effects workforce are tertiary artists. They're not actually primary artists. They're not coming up with concept and story, and oftentimes not even coming up with, like the work that you guys were doing. You weren't coming up with the creatures. an art department or Stan Winston or whomever was coming up with a design for the creature, and you were implementing that design. And so also we have to look at AI, and AI is a very fast moving, very quick learning. What AI did, a month ago, it's doing much better now, and it'll do much better a month from now. So the technology is moving so fast, and the application of it is moving so quickly that you really can't take a snapshot of today and say, well, there are all these problems with AI. There are, but they will be solved, and they'll be solved more quickly than any other technology has ever solved any problems. So if you look at that tertiary artist, let's take just what made India a giant visual effects environment, which was roto, paint, and match moves. So the people that are doing roto, paint, and match moves, in my opinion, at some point will be replaced by an AI bot that's capable of doing it 24/7, doesn't want health care, doesn't need an Aeron chair, doesn't drink a lot of martinis, and just gets it done. So I look out and I say, over the next several years, we could see 75% of the visual effects workforce being replaced by AI.
Well, Daniel.
Well, it's a little bit hard for me because I'm not a VFX artist right now, and I haven't been for a while. But I've dabbled and played around with a lot of VFX or a lot of the AI tools out there. I'm a bit more skeptical of it right now because, and I think there are certain things that it does well. And to be honest with you, my career was because of AI, right? I mean, character effects is a lot of simulation, right? So probably better part of 20 years ago, the character effects artist did not exist. And so AI has a possibility of, yes, there's that disruptive portion of it that may remove rotoscoping artists, right? But there are new opportunities that can come out of that. And I think that's very important. And also, look, I work with other, companies. I do work with studios and all that. And the studios, especially when it comes to AI, they're really, really apprehensive about using AI right now. And the reason why is because a lot of these models are being sued because they're training off their content that they own, right? So there's still a lot to be figured out as to how are they going to use this technology that they are saying is trained off of their own content, right? And so that needs to be hashed out legally. And every studio I talk to has deep concerns. Their legal team are really concerned about that. And if you're a VFX studio that's using AI, right, it's kind of shadow IT from what I understand. So that's one thing there. But generally speaking, though, AI does solve a lot of problems, but what we're seeing out there in the market, like the simpler problems out there that it needs to solve, there have been issues with that. And VFX, I think, is a really tough one, right? I always ask this question to Scott. It's a fun question I ask on Facebook because Scott, he talks about AI a lot. I said, let's say you're a studio executive, you have 10 VFX artists getting paid, a group of them are paid $1 million, and you have a studio executive who's being paid $1 million a year. If you could use AI technology today, which one would you replace, right? And I ask that funny question because I think most people would say the studio executive, because they're more data based, right? And that's where things like ChatGPT could possibly use. With Sora, I don't know if you use the latest version of Sora. Completely disappointed with the new version of Sora. Sora 1 was great. Sora 2, I don't know what that is, right? That is not a film production tool. That is not a VFX tool at all, right? Whereas Sora 1 was something that could help with that. So I'm a little shocked at the latest update to Sora 2, and it feels like OpenAI is going in a different direction when it comes to film production tools, I think. And I thought that was really interesting. And it could be because every iteration, when you put into Sora, I think it costs them $5 a run. So it's very expensive. So you talk about change orders, right? When OpenAI has to pay $5 for a VFX supervisor to crank out 2,000 iterations on a shot, then it becomes pretty costly there. So maybe they're looking at that in their model, and that's why they're concerned there. So, but a lot of thoughts there on AI, generally speaking, though. But yeah.
There's probably multiple podcasts that we do just on that one subject, and certainly watching it evolve in real time. Just yesterday, Google's new model came out with Nano Banana Pro and Gemini 3, and I tried it. It's extraordinary what it can do. To be honest, it is. I think that it's going to keep getting better, and I think what it's doing today is pretty unbelievable, and
Yeah.
we'll see. We will
Yeah.
see where it goes.
How,
We have a
how as a
yeah.
VFX artist, so just quickly to ask you,
Mm.
how have you? I mean, have you been using some of the AI technology? I mean, look, me and Scott are both out of the game here, but I'd like to see maybe as far as what you've done, have you been able to use some of the tools out there? And if so, which one are you using, and how's that been?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in everything that I do, I'm using AI in some capacity. I say in finishing visual effects shots, um, not so much. I'm not doing that so much right now either, because I've went through virtual production more for the last kind of 10 years of my career, which is
Mm,
more real-time graphics as opposed to like
Mm.
final.
mm,
But certainly using it in lots of development, lots of it's advanced to the point now where I think you can use it more for finished bits of shots, and I'm seeing it coming out in real productions too, and seeing
mm,
more and more studios taking it on, and still debating it in the background.
yeah,
The control part is the hard part, because when
yeah.
you're, when I was at ILM, I got notes on the helicopter
The
that was
pixel,
like
that one pixel.
a 20th the size of the screen
Uh,
behind broken glass, fire, and pteranodons, motion blur, and just couldn't see it. And the pilot, my note was, the pilot's shoulder needs more wrinkles. Can you put more wrinkles on it? I'm like, sure.
yeah, that's
Is
where
it
you need a
necessary?
CFX
No.
artist right there. You need a CFX artist to do that right there. There you
That's
go.
what that's what I was, and that's what I did, and I made the dinosaur calf muscles twitch exactly as people wanted them to, and I think, but the dinos, to your point, would run through the sims overnight, so all
Mm,
the shots were like already done by then, rendered out
mm,
already. It was already connected up. You just look at them and go, see the calf muscle exploding or whatever. Like, okay, someone has to go do that by
yeah.
hand. But they were trying. We've been trying to automate this stuff for a really long time, and using
Mm,
AI in places for de-aging and deep fakes for quite a long time.
yeah.
And this moment is new because the compute power is unbelievable, and the generative side of things has got very sophisticated very quickly. And
Mm,
I don't know. I think it's all the problems. I'm with Scott. I think all the problems it has today are going to be
Gone.
resolved.
mm,
There's a concept called pessimism aversion, and
ah.
pessimism aversion is that that you because you're in the mix,
Mm,
and you look at the world, and somebody comes to you and says, by the way, your world is going to end in
yeah.
about 6 months. They can't. That's like la 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 la, and
I'm the horse and buggy guy.
yeah. And the interesting thing too is that a lot of the software developers that are sort of trying to get their heads around what AI is going to be in our world, they're they're sort of singing the tune that, well, now finally you have an opportunity as a creative person to make the movie that you always wanted to make. And that's true. That will be more true as time moves on, because we've seen some of the stuff that comes out, and the production value is through the roof. I mean, it's just unbelievable, the stuff that could be done. And and to an untrained eye, it looks absolutely real.
Mm,
To a trained eye will say, that looks a little
mm,
strange. But to an untrained eye, an audience, they're looking at it and they're going, well, that was Ben Franklin and George Washington talking about Donald Trump. I saw it. It was amazing.
yeah.
So I'm concerned that these software companies are trying to convince visual effects people that you too could be John Lasseter or James Cameron or George Lucas. And I think if we look at the music industry, we've seen similar stuff where, back in the day, if I was a musician and I wanted to make it, I'd have to go into a recording studio, spend lots and lots and lots of money, record a demo, hopefully get it in front of the powers that be. Hopefully they like it. Then they'd put me on tour as an opening act for a bigger act, la, 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 la. And now with Spotify and streaming services, you don't need to do that. You can record in your home. It sounds freaking great. And
Mm,
if you have talent, you rise to the top and get those streams.
mm,
Similarly, there are going to be visual effects people that have that talent.
yeah.
But and similarly, the opportunity to have to go to the gates of hell to be able to get your stuff done will go away.
Mm,
In fact, I'm working on a project that hopefully will make that happen. But it's not. It's going to be 1% It's not, there's not every visual effects artist that ever worked with me or for me, which is about 10,000 people, are James Cameron or George Lucas or even Michael Bay. And so, you know, I think these folks are selling dreams that are empty.
You know, one thing I want to add there, I think it's going to be interesting, is that last year Lionsgate came out with an announcement that they're working with Runway ML, and everybody freaked out, right? They were going to do visual effects with that. And a year later, it turned out that, not sure what the reports were, but I think there was, it wasn't as, it didn't go as planned. And part of the reason why was because even with all the content Lionsgate has produced, Runway ML did not have enough training data to be successful. I'm seeing situations where actual VFX artists are going to work to create training data, right? So, because part of the reason, part of the problem with a lot of these models out
LLMs,
there, the LLMs, they, you know, even with all the film studios, if they're able to get access to that content, which will be very costly for them, right? And the studios are going to ask for a pretty penny for that licensing. They're going to have to create their own content. So imagine a VFX artist just every day you get brought in and you're like, I'm just here to create, you know, explosions every day for this LLM model to get trained off of that. That, I think, is where some VFX artists might be going. I already see some VFX artists doing that already.
You know, if we take it back to the 1980s when I was running ILM, I came up with the concept that, you know, an explosion, why don't we just, you know, film on VistaVision like 500 explosions?
Yeah.
You already have 1,000 explosions.
Yeah.
And so when a director says, I want an explosion, you say, well, what kind of explosion? He or she explains it. You say, oh, here are 20 choices, make a choice. Well, we never had the right explosion.
There,
It's like, well, it's almost there, but it's not really what I want.
And that's another thing, you know, Ed, you mentioned the control there. Like, I've been using a lot of the tools out there, and the minute you get a great image, right, and then you're like, can I just change the camera angle or something?
Nope.
And that's where it becomes a problem, right? And yes,
but it is changing. Even that
it is changing.
That's
and
today,
changing.
Daniel. That's
yes,
today.
but what I'm saying is, and I see that they are making those changes, but the way they make those changes, right? If you need to know about specular highlights, there has to be a control added there or some way to prompt that, right? So it actually increases the complexity of the tool. So I almost think, like, you wonder why you have a complex tool like Nuke, right? It's not because they designed it that way. It's just there are granular controls that you need, right? And I think that's where the AI models all these tools that I've seen, they've added a level of complexity that I don't think a normal person would be like, yeah, this is easy. It becomes a little bit more difficult. You need to be a little bit more sophisticated to use
But it was that same way when we first started doing computer-generated imagery at ILM.
Yeah.
There was no graphical user interface. It was, you know, we were writing code. We were trying to figure it out. You know, and now it's a lot simpler. So, you know, AI and generative AI is moving incredibly fast. And I think the things that stand in its way is power and compute power.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the big issues around the world. And that's another reason why Trump is, you know, kissing up to the Saudis. Right.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a big global problem, right? I think there was a really good podcast on Odd Lots I was listening to about how this AI bubble, it's a real estate AI bubble. It's the real estate, the compute capacity, it's very expensive to do. And that's a whole nother discussion there, but really interesting how it's going to change the world here. And we're all in the middle. So just strap on and hold on tight, you know, so we'll see where it goes.
You don't have to worry about whether you can see or...
Having just had my 74th birthday, I'm glad that I'm old.
Can I join you?
Yeah, you can.
I might need a place to stay.
It's called Jonestown.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There we go. I hear the Kool-Aid's really good there.
The Kool-Aid's good. The Kool-Aid is good.
Well, we're definitely going to see what happens. That's for sure. I think there's several more questions in here. I'd love to ask one or two if you guys have time.
Yeah, feel free. I'm free.
I'm good. My dog is starting to bop me. You know, it's like, what time is it? It's 11:30. Probably wants to go for a walk, but I'm in.
Thank you,
cool
dog.
Out, Russell.
Appreciate your patience. Yeah, the AI subject I think is fascinating. We're going to see that play out in real time. I'm seeing the camera controls being added, seeing the different angles. I'm seeing, you know, Nano Banana was famously the one where you could ask it to replace something very specific, and it's starting to do that. I personally think that it's the integration of it with tools that allow you to be able to use both as a hybrid approach
Yeah.
is going to be where the most traction in the midterm happens. That's what I believe. But
There's a
with you,
company that Jeffrey Katzenberg is investing in, and that one seems the most. That's where you'll actually get a Maya scene. I think an animation company that does that, where it's like prompt driven, and it creates a Maya scene for you. But I haven't used it
those
specifically. Yeah,
people are making vibe coding up their own now.
yeah,
Every day there's
Yeah.
some new thing that someone's
hmm
made that's like, oh, that would have been a whole company before, and
hmm
now it's like this person just
hmm
doing it in the spare time. My two careers, software engineering and visual effects, two things that are being absolutely radically
Changed.
upended
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
changed by AI. And I don't necessarily, I'm an optimist, so I don't
yeah.
necessarily think in a bad way. I think there will be a lot of upset though, for sure. Um, so back to a couple of the questions here. Somebody interesting, in fact, two people here asked, what do you think that the VS should be doing? The VES should be doing.
Oof. So
Scott, you love this
You don't
one.
want to get yourself
I
in
do.
trouble.
This is like, yeah. So back in the day, I was asked to be on the board of the VES when the VES was first put together. And again, I've always carried that mantle of we've got to change this, because we just can't keep going on having companies go out of business, people dying of heart attacks and working 20-hour days and 6 to 7 days a week. And so I was excited about what the VES could be, but it became very, very clear very, very quickly that the VES did not want to do that. And the excuse that they gave it was against our charter. That's like saying we can't do it because we've always done it the other way. That's bullshit. You can change the damn charter. But they didn't have the gumption to be able to sort of go up against the studios and be the change that the visual effects industry needed. And I always felt that, if you don't change the industry and you don't allow profit to flow, that you can throw as many parties and give as many awards as you want, but you're still stuck in this, situation, this terrible situation. And the VES, they throw a damn good party, and
hmm
they give out these pretty cool awards. And it always shocked me that that the lifetime achievement awards were given to people that actually brought the pain to the visual effects worker. So it's like, why are you giving an award because they're a director and they made this movie and made $1 billion? You didn't make any money. You work 6 7 days a week. You didn't get the credit. You were at the end of the credits in the movie and nobody thanked you, and your back hurts and your eyes can't focus because you've been working so hard. So I've always had a problem with the VES. So I tried to join the VES again. I got on the board, I got elected, and I was told roundly that I needed to shut up and not cause any problems. That was by Eric Roth and Jeff Oken. So I quit. And I quit and I walked away. And I thought to myself, the VES does what it does, which is it throws parties and it gives awards. And there's no way that they're going to take the position to actually help the visual effects worker and the visual effects artist because they're afraid of what the blowback will be. And so, what can the VES do? Well, the first thing they can do is get rid of all the old boy network that was always scared of doing anything. And I think they're in the process of doing that. And then the second thing they could do is, grow some ovaries and get out there and do something, which is go to the studios and go to the press and be the quote semi trade organization that I believe that the visual effects industry needs.
I think the only thing I'll add there is I think a lot of VFX artists, say that the VES needs to do something. They legally cannot do anything, right? Because by design, they are a charitable organization. Like how they are designated by law, right? And their charter that was designed to that. So even if they wanted to do something, they would have to redesign or start a new organization. I think that's what our lawyers, I think when we originally talked, because we thought about like, oh, maybe the VS can be the representation for us to represent the industry. And so that's been the challenge with them is that even, not trying to, I'm not a VS member or anything like that, not trying to defend them, but I think because of how they were designed from the start, where they are a charitable organization, they legally cannot do that, or they run risk of losing their funding. So that's why I think a lot of that is an issue. And I think a lot of VFX artists need to understand that, because I know that there's a lot of anger and they want the VES to do something, but they just legally can't.
Another question here. Someone asks, how much noise is the global marketing AI trance creating in the operational side of the VFX industry? So I think what that means
Oh,
is like obviously there's a lot of hype and material flooding people's eyeballs are being covered with imagery. Is that actually translating into operational change in the VFX world?
it's hard for me to say because
Yeah,
I
me
haven't
too.
worked. Yeah, 'cause, I don't want to say something that isn't known out there. I would recommend the effects guy did a really good podcast with, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name, but he actually does research, the individual they had on that does research on employment levels across all the VFX facilities. And it's really interesting that he was able to say that even though with the advent of AI and its disruptive effects, that right now employment has been pretty stable globally. Now, that production levels can rapidly change there, but I thought that was really interesting. That being said, we don't know what's going to happen, or when something major happens where every VFX facility says we got to use this tool. This is how we create VFX now, and then all of a sudden people lose their jobs, right? So that could happen. We don't know, right? But I don't know. I think generally speaking, though, I can just say out there in social media and stuff, there has been, I think, this AI, what we're, everybody's calling AI slop, right? Where everybody's just creating crap out there, and it looks like crap. And even I'm a hey, I'm a perpetrator of this. I use Sora too, and I make these stupid videos of me that I put out there and share. But I in no way would put that in front of a VFX supervisor and say, hey, this is a great shot for your movie. He'd be like, no way. So, I'm not sure where that'll go, but maybe people could chime in there, maybe in the chat after, to say, hey, here's what VFX facilities are doing. But I have no position to say that right now because I'm not working at one right now. So that's
I tell you,
kind of
I
drop
sit
there.
on a couple of advisory boards, and one of the companies I sit on an advisory board for is a studio based in Pune, India. And again, the lion's share of their work is RPM work. And I am telling their managing director, be afraid, be very afraid, because I mean, the reason why Indian facilities became such an important part of the pipeline was because the studios wanted stuff for less. They
Yeah,
always want stuff for
yeah,
less. And
yeah.
so instead of paying a visual effects worker in London, they can pay a visual effects worker in Pune or Mumbai considerably less money, and they're doing the work for a lot less money. So, if you're an RPM person and working in India, I'd be looking over my shoulder.
But at the same time, I mean, obviously with AI it's different. But cheap labor never stays cheap, right? And I think what we saw in reality with Sony Pictures ImageWorks, with the Sony hack, there were internal emails that revealed why they were closing their Indian facilities. Is that the cost of labor went up, right? So cheap labor doesn't stay cheap. But with AI, we don't know where that's going to go, right? So there's going to be some disruption there for sure. Yeah.
There's some interesting stuff happening in the models where the power and compute seems to be a increasing demand, but also the people making models that run more efficiently, and like some of the Chinese models that are running really
Yeah.
Really cheaply.
more
Mm-hmm.
efficiently
Yeah.
and quite cheaply.
And we don't get access to that here in the States, right? I think like none of the app
Yeah, you
stores use
can.
that. Oh, you can. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was under the impression that we don't get access to those because for whatever reason, I think there was some pushback from the United States on that.
There's no, I mean, I think the only one is just whether legally it's allowed to flow through. And then at that point, you're in the sort of soup of cultural agreement or disagreement on what's okay and what's not
Yeah.
to come out. There's people who are making clean models. There's people who are using models they are saying are clean. There's people who are making very not clean models. And there's shots starting to appear in published TV series and movies.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Um,
Interesting.
Yeah, no, it's happening. It's figuring it out by doing, as opposed to trying to agree on what's okay or not. I think
Mhm.
it's what I'm seeing. There's the Netflix released a movie with one shot of an generative AI shot in a thing,
Mhm.
and that's like one thing. I guess they could probably take out if they were told to, and it was a foreign movie, not a US market movie, so
I
I
see.
guess a bit less risk. But
Mhm.
they're just people are trying it.
Yeah, makes sense.
Um, Another question here: does the current economy in VFX signal the return of studio-owned VFX facilities they may need to due to the industry collapse?
So the studio and visual effects facility concept has gone through, ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. It's sort of like I can recall when I was at ILM, there was Buena Vista Visual Effects, and Disney owned them, and then they shuttered it, and then Disney decided that they came back to me and said, could we put a deal together with ILM where we could have a slot that you would always keep available for the Disney project, because we were busy and there was a lot of visual effects work going on, and they were concerned that they wouldn't have access to ILM's team. And I said, well, let's talk about that. And of course, they wanted the A team. And I said, I can't do that, but if I was, it's going to cost XYZ. And they blanched. And so they decided to start the secret lab. And they wound up, running the secret lab for a period of time, only to find out that you can't make any money in visual effects, particularly from the model of the way the studio works at the visual effects company. And if you have an in-house visual effects company, you have even a greater advantage to take advantage of them than you do if they were an outside visual effects company. So, the secret lab shuts down. And so we've seen studios acquire them and get out of them, and acquire them and get out of them. And I remember conversations back in the day with Sony Pictures Imageworks. Sony was desperately trying to get out of Sony Pictures Imageworks, and they were looking to sell it. But the problem was the way they accounted for it, and the amount of depreciation that they had, and the building that they moved into, and the cost of acquiring all of these computers and whatnot, put them in a situation where they made the determination to hold on to it, because losing money at Sony Pictures Imageworks was better than losing money by shuttering it. So I think we'll continue to see, studios, and, we've seen now streamers and tech companies acquiring visual effects companies. And I think at some point they'll realize, what the hell are we doing? It's much easier to put the risk on an outside company and let them lose the money, as opposed to us lose the money. So I can continue to see that. Now, I was part of a group that was looking to consolidate visual effects companies about 10 years ago, where they thought that if you could acquire like 4 of the big 5 or 3 of the big 5, you could change the business model and change the way in which the industry worked. And so I was tasked to go to Disney and talk to Disney about the possibility of us acquiring ILM. And Disney's position was that the technology this is again 10 years ago, the technology that ILM had was so valuable to the future of Disney and what it was that they were doing, that they didn't mind losing money at ILM, because that technology would, cut across lots of their different divisions. And then we saw, the acquisition of the software for Weta, where I think the number was $1.2 billion, where Unity wound up acquiring Weta software. And once they acquired it, and I know John Rigatello pretty well, he was the CEO of the company at the time, and they spent a ton of money acquiring the software, and they didn't know what to do with it, right? And so once again, we see fool's gold and people trying to acquire visual effects companies and then selling them off or shuttering them. And I think that'll continue.
Seems like it is. It's trending again.
Yeah.
Somebody here asks, is it possible teams will become like the Godzilla -1 or Flow teams in size and profitability?
If they're smart. Yeah, it sure helps when your director is your visual effects supervisor.
Yeah, I think we last podcast, I think me and Scott joined Chris Nichols, right? I think it was mentioning that we're starting to see kind of those smaller pods, right, of creative teams and VFX artists. Again, I can't speak to that because I'm not working in the industry anymore, but there may be some opportunities. If you're a rugged VFX artist out there who likes to own end to end, and with AI, some of the capabilities out there, you could really see those type of VFX teams getting put together, which I think are just pretty agile groups, right, that are very small and very rugged there.
Joan Collins says, happy 74th birthday, Scott.
Thanks,
Sorry,
Joan.
47.
47.
Yeah, but I have the body of a 73-year-old.
You probably got a better body than me for sure.
No, I don't know.
No,
I don't.
no. Come on,
Daniel, I don't throw a
You're
left like you throw.
yeah. That's the thing. Scott knows I can. Yeah, it's a funny
He
story.
can mix
but,
it up.
Yeah, I
He
can mix it up well.
up.
This pretty face, I can definitely throw it down for sure. But
well,
yeah.
you protect it. You protect that pretty face. Yeah.
Always keep your hands up, is what I say.
Yeah. See, my nose is too big. It's too much of a target.
Careful, it can be a weapon, though.
There you
No,
go. That's true. That's true.
Good times.
Let me see if there are any more in here. I think there's one or two, but I know that we've gone kind of long today, and I appreciate you guys
no
staying
worries.
on.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's always fun.
The last one I think that's in here that I will ask is, where has it gone? So somebody says it's interesting making global statements about employment. I would say the number of people employed might be the same, but the number of workers in developing economies would be up and in established economies are down. Any thoughts on that?
Say that again. That was a little over my head there.
So I think what they're saying is maybe the total number of people employed is the same, but it's shifted more towards developing countries versus not developed.
Yes, absolutely. Well, without a doubt. And the reason it's shifted towards it's hard to call India a developing country, but the reason why it's done that is because, at the end of the day, producers want it cheap, they want it fast, and they want it cheap. Choose all three. They want all of that. And that was what drove the migration to subsidies, and that was what drove the migration to India. And in fact, subsidies it's an interesting thing, and Daniel and I have too much information and have really banged our heads against it, but it's really corporate socialism.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're taking multi-billion-dollar multinational countries, and you're supporting them with taxpayer dollars. It's socialism for corporations. Meanwhile, forgetting, the actual people that make it happen,
Is the fact that effectively the cost risen in India, and you just mentioning that it's not really a developing country anymore, which is a huge economy, huge population, as the fact it's developed more now meant that the cost has risen?
My experience is, I sit on the advisory council of a company called Digicor. They're located in Pune, and we get on a weekly conversation. And when I listen to, the managing director, it sounds like things are still really inexpensive. And in fact, because there's such limited amount of work right now, everybody's doing the circle to the bottom. Everybody's undercutting each other. So what might have been a shot that cost $7,000, they're now doing for $700. So they're desperate. They're in the same boat that we were in back in the day, where there's not enough work to be able to fill every facility, and you'd rather have a loss on shots as opposed to a total loss. I use that airplane analogy, which is, if you own an airplane and it costs you $100 to break even, it's better to charge $80 and put butts in the seat than have it sit, in storage and lose $100 a seat. So that's what's happening in India right now.
Right. Interesting. So yeah, well, we will see where all of it goes. I guess from my perspective, it seems like, just from my own vision in LinkedIn as one signal from me, that people seem to be hiring more at the moment. I don't know if you guys are seeing any of that signal, but even in the US, in places where it can cost more.
Yeah. Well, there was a dearth of work for a while, right? Post strike, there was really a dearth of work, and it's starting to come back. So yes, the good news is that it's starting to come back. The bad news is it's starting to come back.
You got to do the work now. That's are you looking for work? Hey, maybe I'll go back to the VFX industry. VFX Soldier comes back. Who wants to hire VFX Soldier?
The return of visual effects Soldier.
It's cool that you're still blogging. I'm interested. You're still passionate enough to do that and care about it.
Well, yeah, I think it was because of the announcement by Donald Trump, right? I mean, it just it smacked me in the face. I was like, I couldn't believe it, right? That here you were, 10 years ago writing about something and something that you passionately advocated for, and the person that you disagree with everything, the one thing that you agree with them on was something that you worked so long on, right? And so it's really interesting. And so we'll see what happens. There are some things happening with the government shutdown that recently happened. There's no news I can deliver, but there are a group of VFX artists that are working with our former law firm that are trying to implement the tariffs. I mean, cool if you're in the United States, right? But just want to make it clear, there are a lot of international artists that don't like this, and I understand that, right? And it will be disruptive if the tariffs do come through. So we'll see what happens. But
let me take my swipe at that, Daniel.
Yeah.
This guy in the White House has got some serious problems.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yes.
Serious problems.
Yes.
And as much as I'd like to think that visual effects and the motion picture industry was important to him,
it's not.
He's building a ballroom. He's dealing with marble and gold toilets, and about those Epstein files.
Yeah.
So
this might cover up the Epstein files enough for him, right? Well, so he's definitely
the cover up for the Epstein files is now he's going to hang and shoot and execute senators and Congress people. That's his newest one. Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
It's like I'm still waiting for Mexico to build the wall.
Yeah.
So I don't have high hopes.
I'm still waiting for that health insurance plan that he said he's going to get.
That's right.
20 years ago, he said he's. So we'll see. I'll be here 10 years later. He's going to implement that movie tariff at one point.
That's right.
Yeah, but we'll see. But yeah.
Well, look forward to having you back in 10 years, and or maybe before.
All right, start the clock. See you in 2035.
Definitely at least in 10 years. I think the world's moving at such a clip at this point that we could come back in like a couple of weeks and have something to say. But I appreciate both of you. Thank you so much for taking time out.
Our pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate it. And great seeing you again, Scott, and great meeting you, Ed. I really do appreciate it, and happy to come back. We'll see if there's news out there on the movie tariff front. Would love to come back on your show and answer as many questions as possible.
That'd be great. You'll always be welcome. And
don't forget, buy my book Upstart.
Yes,
it's available on Amazon.
I
don't have a copy. There you go.
Get your copy right here.
Yeah.
Right here. I have my copy. I have 2 copies. By the way,
it's a tell-all, and it's a pretty interesting read, if I do say so myself.
Great,
and it's fun. It's a fun read. It's like a history book with a sense of humor, and I enjoy it. Definitely recommend it to all our listeners.
Thanks, Ed.
All the things that we've talked about today, there's stories and examples of how history repeats itself, and amazing creative book though, and an inspiring one. Thank you for writing it.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
You bet. And thank you also to our studio audience for coming in and asking great questions. We appreciate you guys too. We'll be back again in another couple of weeks. And if you're interested in hearing more about what we do at CG Pro, seeing more of these shows, sign up for our newsletter and we'll tell you about when they're coming up. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. Go out and check out LinkedIn. There's jobs out there. Go make cool stuff. Be inspired. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.